Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Parents Engaging Parents Beloved Community Check-In. I'm Erica Beverett, and I'm here to share with you a couple of updates that we have here going on at PEP. I know it's been a minute, but I'm so glad that we are back and here with you today. So today we are going to have a very special guest, our brother in the work that we're doing called Environmental Justice. He is the Senior Ports campaign there, and for the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Southeast regions. And we're definitely excited to have him on here. But first, we're going to have a couple of announcements and a couple of PEP champions to join us as well to share on some of those updates. So, of course, Parents Engaging Parents' mission is to promote civic awareness and proactive action based on the interest of parents and community leaders. So, with that, I would love to bring up Miss Arlene. Miss Arlene, please join us on stage.
Good evening, all. My name is Arlene Ramsey, Community Engagement Partner and Advisory Board Member here at Parents Engaging Parents, New Jersey. What we have happening now is the Clean Ports for Newark's Future initiative, where we are in need of some port ambassadors to help us with this initiatives to get petitions signed and engage the community and canvass the South Ward of Newark, New Jersey and the East Ward of Newark, New Jersey. We'll be glad to partner with you.
All right, thank you, Arlene. And please, if you could, just share with us your experience in beginning this campaign and what it means to you.
This campaign means the world to me. As you know, clean air and clean water is the foundation to our health. Our skin is the largest organ on our body, and we bathe with the water that we use every day. We drink this water, we cook with this water. Clean air is also essential for good health. The pollution is responsible for ailments such as cancer, lung disease, asthma, heart disease, you name it. Therefore, this initiative to get ports to electrify their equipment will help us a great deal in the city of Newark, New Jersey. Protect Newark's future.
Thank you, Arlene. And that is definitely what we are definitely trying to push right now. This is our work. We do want this clean and healthy air for our communities for now and for years to come. So thank you for that. And thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
Okay, so definitely everybody, if you are watching, if you're at home, hopefully on your computer, even if you can just screenshot this and scan it later or ask your friends to scan it, definitely do that. We need all the support that we can possibly get to promote our healthy ports for our futures. Okay, so thank you, Arlene, again for that. And next, we're going to have a word from Miss Elise West. I believe she does have some exciting news. She's always putting on the best events around this time. I know it's a very joyous time for a lot of folks in our community. And so, Miss Elise, are we good to go? I'm going to bring you on stage. Oh, all right. All right, Miss Elise, did you want to share your event? And if not, that's okay. I could definitely do it for you. All right, so what we do have right here is there is an Easter party going on. This is the 2025 event. It's going to be on Friday, April the 18th from 12 p.m. to 4 at West Essence Park in East Orange. There's always a good time. Definitely, if you can, screenshot this again and scan the code. Ask a friend to scan the code, and you all register to bring your kids down. There's usually a really great time, always food in the area, always lots of fun to be had. So definitely, if you could, just join us there. So it's Bringing in the Blessings and Essex County Commissioners Tashimi Cooper in partnership with the St. George Lodge and the St. George Chapter 12 OES Treehouse and Treehouse Cares. Exciting time. So it looks like it's going to be a Easter egg hunt. That's always a good time. All right. Another event that we do have coming up in partnership with the Orange Department of Health is the community baby shower. That is going to be held on May 10th. Definitely register. There's going to be loads of resources. If you know somebody that's having a baby and need a baby items, all the items are going to be free. This is the second annual community baby shower hosted by Mayor Dwayne Warren. And definitely Parents Engaging Parents will be there. Prenatal Health Equity Initiative will be there. Adonai, it looks like it's going to be some bakery goods. So it's definitely, and Embrace Relief is going to be there as well. And I'm sure it's going to be a great time. Like I said, all the items are going to be brand new. It's going to be held on Saturday, May 10th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Military Park in Orange. And if, just in case it rains, definitely there is a rain date for May 17th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move forward in our program today. Definitely wanted to introduce and reintroduce Terrence Bankston, who is a senior ports and freight campaigner at Friends of the Earth. He is prioritizing initiatives aimed at reducing air pollution and from the port and freight activities, particularly in Black and Brown communities, which is affected by environmental hazards. And so we're going to hear from him coming up right now. So we're going to go ahead and bring Terrence to the stage. Welcome. And
good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, so I'm gonna see if this works with me sharing my screen. As indicated, do you guys see any slides at all or no?
I do. I'm going to add it to the stage, and then we're going to ask that this banner be removed. Great.
Excellent. Okay, so I am going to, I speak fast by nature, but I am Terrence Bankston from Newark, New Jersey. And because I'm from Newark, New Jersey, I'm not offended if you put in the comments to slow down a little bit, or if something, some information stands out to you more than the other, please make a note of it. I'm sure will be opportunity towards the end for engagement and in terms of questions or comments or feedback. And then I've added my contact and email address into the comments section. And we also have our senior ports and freight. We also have our ports and community engagement assistant, Tyler Johnson, who's also a native of Newark, New Jersey, who's here, and he'll be assisting me in the comments. And Erica, if comments come up on the pages that we're sharing as well, we'll make sure that we feed those things to you. And so this presentation is titled Bridging the Gap Between Our Ports and Environmental Justice Communities. And pretty much this PowerPoint serves as a guiding resource, really a blueprint for what motivates our work day to day. As indicated, we've recently added the Gulf Coast to our work portfolio, specifically the communities of Houston and also New Orleans and South Louisiana. Outside of that, since 2023, when I started with FO, we've focused on ports, air quality, education around electrification, and also zero emissions in the Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and Northwest regions. Some of our partners that we work with, and excuse if it looks a little weird, I'm not sure, it might be just this particular platform, but we won't spend too much time on this slide. This just gives an indication of not just the areas that we work in, but the who we're working with. And so we're working with environmental justice groups like Harambe House out of Savannah, Georgia, and Rise St. James out of Louisiana. But we're also working with groups who are not classified as environmental justice groups, which I think is important as we work to bridge the gaps between our port communities and residential communities. But Parents Engaging Parents, New Jersey, again, one of the few groups who are not environmental justice, but have put themselves in the fight and have adopted really the principles of environmental justice as one of their pillars. And so excited to continue this work with Parents Engaging Parents, understanding that the job is just too big for any one organization or any one coalition. The more folks that we have out here, particularly groups like groups who empower parent advocates, I think is key, again, in terms of best protecting ourselves, but also advocating for ourselves. Rutherford and Miller in 2019 shared that air pollution from port activities has been linked to higher rates of asthma, heart disease, cancer, and early deaths in those that live, work, or go to school near those ports. And so I wanted to focus on two different groups here when we talk about being good neighbors and we talk about an internal, external customer approach. Typically what works, what doesn't work, all right, or what does work for your internal customers, the people who help you do this work. If it doesn't work for them, it will not work for the people on the outside. And so I like to adopt in my approach to advocacy work, an internal, external customer approach. If we, again, what works for us will work for others. And if we service others with the same intensity and enthusiasm that we do for ourselves, again, it makes us a better neighbor and encourages the port to operate as a better neighbor. So when we talk about the economic benefits of ports, because that's what really guides and dictates how ports operate, the fact that they've been allowed to operate really as a bad neighbor in a sense, by not properly regulating for many ports their emissions, by not properly reporting them. Because if you don't have the information, you can't say, hey, this is not right. You know, when my child is missing asthma, and they say 9 out of 10 absences in Essex County are due to asthma, when mom and dad have to stay home from work because their child cannot go to school, or when we talk about Cancer Alley, like in Louisiana, those things, South Louisiana, those things are real issues. And so there is no price, right? There is no amount of money that's worth the lives or shortening the, with intention, shortening the lifespans of Black and Latino residents who live near ports. That is not okay. And so we want to talk about adverse impacts that it has on laborers, right? We don't want to just talk about longshoremen and how much money they make and how great of a career that job is if we're not going to also value their health as much. And so we wanted to make that connection. Severe health impacts on EJ communities. So it's two different communities that are impacted. Again, the internal customer, the external customer. And often the laborers have a double impact, right? Because they also live in those particular communities that we are talking about. And so what is maritime soot pollution, right? And why is it an EJ issue? One, soot pollution coming from our ports, our maritime, and also for EJ communities like Newark, New Jersey, Elizabeth, New Jersey, Camden, Patterson. Well, trucking, when you see thousands and thousands of trucks every 2 to 3 hours traveling through your community, past your parks, right, being circumvented around suburban schools and suburban parks and senior homes and things of that nature, and community centers that are in suburban towns, but they're sent directly through the towns of Elizabeth and right past Weequahic Park, which is the backyard of the port and the airport. And so between the trucking and also the lack of electrification and emissions that come from all of the port operations, all of the equipment, the tugboats, the ships, the cargo ships, the cranes, all of those things are producing emissions. And when we talk about New Jersey, we understand we also have a rail system. So transportation in general has a direct impact on our health. And again, more so with Black and Latino women, which you'll learn a little bit about in another slide. But people of color are disproportionately burdened. That's why this is an environmental justice issue, by unhealthy air. According to the American Lung Association, they said 72 million people lived in a county with at least one failing grade for air pollution. People of color are 61% more likely than white people, as I alluded to earlier, to live in a county with unhealthy air quality. Now, why is that? Because historically, ports was used for slave trade. So there's no coincidence that we, people of color, typically live near those ports. Communities that live near ports or live near pollution sources, as we say, because I talked about trains, I talked about trucking, then I talked about the actual equipment that's utilized at our ports, like industrial facilities. Also, when we talk about warehousing and Amazon warehousing, right, and a lot of the UPS warehousing, and heavily trafficked roads are disproportionately affected by short-term spikes in air pollution. So yes, when you see the Amazon delivery trucks, and I've ordered two, and you don't select that option to consolidate the boxes, you can open up a package. I did just the other day. There was literally 4 boxes in one, or 4 boxes all of inside of each other. And so what's in the box, right, is a concept to say that we must be conscious in every aspect of our life when it comes to not just advocating, but again, protecting ourselves. And these links can be shared with you for more information as well. I wanted to take a little bit to focus on what I consider to be endless possibilities for the Mid-Atlantic. Why is improving air quality important? And why is electrification, full electrification, the best option, right, for New York and New Jersey? Well, air quality improvement is expected to translate to at least $150 million in healthcare benefits a year, right? We know about inadequate healthcare to treat these different illnesses and sicknesses that hinder us each and every day, or just prevents us without a knee on our back or our chest from breathing, right? And so we say with full electrification, we estimate that PM2.5, which is the scientific term I like to say for soot pollution, just to give you an idea of what that is. If you can remember when the Canadian wildfire occurred sometime last year, and you saw 2 years ago, and you saw the smoke coming all the way down to as far as Washington, D.C. Well, what you were seeing in the air is what you breathe every day, and it's equivalent to 7 packs of cigarettes. But if we don't see it, right, we are not alarmed, we're not scared. But when we saw how dark at 2 o'clock in the afternoon it was, and we can see the smoke traveling through, or the soot traveling through, we became alarmed. I know you did, because I was getting texts and calls from folks in New Jersey of all ages saying, Terrence, is this what you've been talking about? What is going on? And it's exactly what, but what it said was, people are now making a connection, right, to those things. So we really, really do appreciate that. So this is a bunch of scientific talk to talk about why electrification and actions to reduce emissions will be beneficial for New Jersey. But all electrification technologies, I think what's important is that electrify hovercraft alone, right? Just the hovercraft could reduce emissions by 30%. And so there is some short or low-hanging fruit that we can do. We like to say that the East Coast ports, specifically New York and New Jersey, which is the third busiest port, while the West Coast ports are more progressive, they are not perfect. New York and New Jersey, you don't need to be perfect, but we need you to be progressive, because wherever the port of New York and New Jersey go, so will the rest of the East Coast. And hopefully with some regional and national support, we could advance those efforts in the most impacted areas like Louisiana, and also in not just Houston, Texas, but throughout the state of Texas. So there was, prior to, and we are anticipating an attack on climate groups tomorrow, actually, as some of us are preparing to respond to the Trump administration about that. But I think it's important to know how we got here, and so that we could continue to hold whoever's in office accountable for what was good, what is good, and what we fought for. And so for years, decades really, the founders and other advocates who have joined the environmental justice and the climate justice movement have advocated, have fought for what was released under the Environmental Protection Agency last year, the Clean Ports funding under IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And thanks to groups like FOE and Specific Environment and Ocean Conservancy, but we were a part of a coalition with other groups who said, no, wait a minute, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is missing something. It's missing a provision for ports. It's missing prioritizing community engagement around ports, meaningful community engagement that produces transformational actions and type of campaigns versus just those that are transactional. You do this for me, you sign this letter for me, and I'll continue to pollute you, but I'll give you 50,000 or 100,000 to do that. So we don't want that, right? We want a seat at the table. We want to be a part of the drafting and the brainstorming around port operations and port plans, and we want to be able to engage in that way. But an unprecedented amount of money, you see here, an additional 450 million per year was put out just with the Department of Transportation. And when we talked a little bit about Justice 40, if that's a buzzword for you, look, if that's not a buzzword term for you, look that up. What was Justice 40, or what is it? It was a requirement. When we talk about executive orders, this one was a good one. This executive order required all federal agencies to invest 40% of their operational dollars into overburdened communities like Newark and Elizabeth, Camden, and Patterson that was impacted. And this was first, not in this in the world, just for this country, a first for this country. And so $3 billion also went into greening of the ports, and that funding is being held hostage right now. And with New Jersey being awarded one of the highest grants of that particular funding, and for the first time this year. And so outside of that 3 million, or a part of that 3 million is also, $3 billion is also $3 million that is dedicated or allocated to planning and is to be shared amongst groups who are doing this type of work. And so there's another reason why we need to be at the forefront of this conversation locally, educating and holding our local elected officials accountable to taking and amplifying our message that regardless of who's in office, regardless of who's the president, clean air was good enough for us back in prior to last November's election, and it's still a priority and good enough, and we're good enough for that now. And so we want to make that clear. The last message we need to send to this president or to DC is that, well, we only care about it depending on who the elected official is. Again, we need to let them know we meant it last year and we still mean it now. Two important statistics, again, and you kind of heard me say it, but this is it matter of factly. And the reference is from Industrial Economics Incorporated. But across the nation, Black Americans reportedly have the highest risk of dying from soot pollution exposure on a per person basis, with a rate more than triple that of white Americans. And so that's why it's racist, right? The average concentrations of soot pollution exposures for Latino residents is reportedly 75% higher than white residents in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. Mid-Atlantic is where you all are from and where I'm from too. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Wilmington, really down to Virginia. And so there's data that backs this up. We talked about Justice 40. This tells you a little bit about what it is, but also Google that and use that as a part of your advocacy. It's okay to say, well, President Biden got this right, and we want you, President Trump, to continue the good work, and not make it about personal petty politics when it comes to progressive advocacy around ports. And again, not just clean air, but also clean water. This is how we work with ports, not just in New Jersey, but other ports. We support them with EPA engagement, making linkages, hosting webinars that helps to bridge the gap and answer questions, because everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has some barriers and some challenges, including the folks who operate the ports. But we also provide information and link them to the tech industry around electrification. We talk about shipping and how we can help to reduce pollution from different better shipping practices and policies that the port can be on board with supporting. And then also helping them to explore different transitioning opportunities for green infrastructure, because it's not just something that will just happen overnight. There's a process to get there, but there needs to be, again, prioritized according to not just the dollars that the port makes or the preference of the port, but also the preference of the people. My last point on here is, how can FO help you as a port official or authority? I think that that's important, because sometimes we can have folks, we can tell ourselves that we do a good job, right? We can measure ourselves. So we can say, well, we offer you all this great stuff. But here is what's the greatest: when we say, well, we offer you this great stuff and we think it's great and we think it's fantastic, but how can we help you? Who do you need to hear from? How can we support you? And so that's how we kind of foster and been fostering or cultivating relationships with port officials in a very unique way, in a different way, over the past few years, and we'll continue to do so as a priority over the next 3 to 5 years. And then our local groups, whether they're environmental justice groups or other groups, social, climate, any type of advocacy groups. Well, we help with advocacy support on local issues by drafting resources, by helping with create op-eds to amplify not just the work that you do, but also the issues that are important to you and your community. We provide policy advice. We provide training, right? Because ports is new for all groups, and really understanding how the entire maritime shipping supply chain impacts us on a day-to-day basis, I think is important for us to know, so that we can empower those who are the most impacted to be their own voice, right? Not necessarily the experts.
Yeah, that definitely is a piece. I think that obviously that training is definitely what our community needs, as far as to get everybody rolling into that civic engagement and knowing. And like you said, like once we had that whole incident with the forest fires and the impact that it made, it really woke everybody up. It really did.
Well, I think that too, and hats off to the EPA too. I was going to say, they really did a Herculean job in terms of listening to the community around these grants. So they put in, Erica, scoring assessments that said, no, you can't fake community engagement. It has to be real. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a long history of it. If you got it right a month ago, let's see it. But we want it to be real, and they weighed heavily in on that. And so we need federal government, again, listening and going and structuring these, requests for proposals, or these NOFAs, to really make them community centered. Send those folks that you are giving government funding to a message to say, no, if you want our money, we want you to prioritize community. So I just echoing what you said too. We also help with local support with air monitoring projects, green infrastructure projects, education to air pollution. We've come into your schools, Erica, your school network, and had sort of science classes or science workshops really around environmental, and seeing not just the students excited, but the staff excited was great too. And then again, we do in the community engagement piece with how can FO help you as an EJ group and as a community. I had went through these slides quickly because this is just information and examples of work that's in progress in other communities that we're working in. So when they say, well, Terrence, why are you so, focused on New Jersey and the Mid-Atlantic and da-da-da? Because what's good enough for the West Coast is also good enough for my coast, I like to say. And so we provide these examples as a sense of motivation, and hopefully to say, well, maybe we can adopt some of these things. Maybe some of these things don't work, but at least it'll get us to thinking so that we can make recommendations. With that being said, Erica, that pretty much concludes my presentation today in terms of kind of outlining the priorities of Friends of the Earth, particularly for the next 3 to 5 years, but also what's driving our work and why. And so I hope that those who are watching from the different platforms was able to take away some valuable information today.
Thank you for that. I know that I have a couple of questions myself, and I wanted to know a little bit of if there's any like resistance from port authorities or industry players when you're pushing for electrification.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's probably two different pushbacks. One, the industry wants to explore alternative fuel options, but that is not something that is necessarily embraced, particularly by the older guard of environmental justice. And so there needs to be more conversations around that. But I also am an advocate for that. You'll see in our literature, we really don't discuss alternative fuel options at all. We say that electrification is the big one solution, to simply electrify at 100% the entire port, and the faster the better. And we want them to continue to put out emission reports. So we're proud to say that New Jersey does, but there's ports that do not, like Savannah, Georgia, which has been talking about doing it, but has not. Hiding your emission reports does not allow you or stakeholders to help you prioritize which emissions you should be addressing first versus last, but also it helps to advocate for funding based on what the actual need of the community is. So some of the outside of that, some of the pushback is simply that ports are not used to having to engage with the community. They're used to being able to ignore them and offer a few, what I like to say, bad jobs, not necessarily good jobs, and definitely not necessarily careers to those who reside in those communities that, again, they impact. But I think consistency definitely has shown that there are some good people. And I say that there are good people everywhere. There are community-centered people that work at ports. And sometimes they just need that people power to kind of get them going and encourage them to, regardless of what may be going on internally with different decision makers, that they can continue to bring the community to the table if, in fact, that's their role, which ports have that. They have community offices, they have sustainability offices that are supposed to work with the community. And so we want to see that consistently going on. We know that you won't become a perfect neighbor overnight, but we have to stop prioritizing cargo and cargo owners and shippers who are really driving the pollution over people who live in those communities.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have any other questions or comments, or just want to enter a discussion?
Yeah, great information. Question: how are the ports going about engaging the community?
Some examples, and we're working on this, like if I looked at New Orleans, they have 3 groups that they work with: Urban League of Louisiana, one of the local colleges, and then a group named the Lower Ninth, which kind of is like a tri-block association in a sense. Notice that none of those groups are environmental justice groups. Meanwhile, we have a flagship statewide group right in their community called Rise St. James, Louisiana, and they're not a part of their community network. Why? So again, when you don't have environmental justice people at the table, things are going to get by the average person that doesn't do environmental justice work. And so we want to see them engaging not just their clique, right? The people that they want to work with, but also maybe the people that will pressure them a little bit. And authorities shouldn't be afraid to be questioned and question a little bit versus just sign off on these letters, for these projects that are destroying literally communities and relocating schools without a permission slip from the community. And then we have examples of in Newark, New Jersey, where they embrace the concept and the development of a Port Advisory Council that's led by the Southport Environmental Alliance. And myself, I represent, didn't just help to organize that, but also to serve as a member representing Friends of the Earth. We also have folks from the Mayor's Office, Sustainability Office, representing that on that committee. We also have people from the actual port, which is the first time represented on that Port Advisory Council that meets on a monthly basis, having ongoing conversation, right?
And how could we join that? Like, how would the average person be able to join that?
I would say, for depending on your community, reach out to the Southport Environmental Alliance. Regina Towns is the contact person, and I will ask Tyler to put Regina's Southport Environmental Alliance email address inside, and maybe even paste the Southport Environmental Alliance's website into the chat for those who are interested in the North one. There's also a Healthy Ports Coalition for Houston, and we are presently working with the Harambe House in Savannah, and also again Rise St. James, Louisiana, for the entire state of Louisiana. And then we're working with the Wilmington Coalition, Delaware Coalition, Community Benefits Coalition, on developing a Port Advisory Council for them as well. And so this is something that is known on the West Coast, and piloted on the West Coast, had not been introduced on the East Coast. We were able to do that for the first time with SWIA, and we want to continue that. And then excited to work with PEP as they lead, and with the support of Friends of the Earth and others, the exploration of a national Port Advisory Council that will serve as a national support system for those local Port Advisory Councils, both continuing to advance by going into those communities and finding groups that are interested in the work, and then training them up and supporting them to start their own, but also being a resource to the ones that are established, to ensure that they have funding, particularly from the private industry, to sustain themselves and to stay engaged, but also to tap into federal grants once we get through this challenging period.
I know that this is a big step, right? But it's always great. It pays off to be optimistic. Mm-hmm. So this next question is, do you think that the Board of Education should add a curriculum centered around environmental justice to the schools K through 12, or at least in middle school and up?
Yeah, because the reality of it is that when I was in school, they made us, they limited the environmental conversation to being about the ozone layer and hugging trees, or they call people tree huggers. Right. And so as an adult, we have to mature and make this a part of the quality of life conversations. And so, yes, our schools should not be funding bus companies that are not electrified or have no plan to electrify. Why are we doing that? We should not be supporting delivery food companies that come into our schools and our community that are using diesel trucks that idle. Or if they do they have a plan to transition? If they do not have a plan to transition, if they don't find the value in transition, they should not get contracts with the board. So the board has to be its own advocate and check inside its own closets and hallways and make sure that they are greening accordingly, because I remember when Kim Gaddy had to be the only school board member to stand up over 20 years ago and have the water shut down. That was for the first time. It happened again not too many years ago, and again she so happened to be on the board and got it turned off again. It wasn't the superintendent. No one was looking for it. It wasn't the custodians. It wasn't the maintenance guys, because they needed a seat in a classroom around how they can advance environmental justice at our schools. And I'll just conclude with this point, that it's statistically proven that high schools, for whatever reason, have there's worse air quality around our high schools than our elementary schools. Why is that? There's a reason why that is. And so the data supports it. And now we have to figure out, what is it about the positioning of these high schools, or what's going on? Is it more activity? Are they in more residential neighborhoods, or where more trucks and things of that nature come through? So yes, it's things that the school board can do to advance environmental justice, but also is resources that they also can be applying for to implement these type of programs and into their curriculums. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. How would this affect port workers? And so that's a great question, because electrification doesn't mean automation. And so that has been a fear tactic and a scare tactic used primarily because often port employees are left out of the conversation, right? It's usually about a transaction. It's usually about a raise. And once they get the dollar amount, then all right, it's okay to poison us again. And so we like to use an example in California where there is a legislation on the books that says you cannot replace people with machines, but you could put them in a safer position, because those machines need oversight. They need to be still operated by a human being. But the reality of it is that it is also dangerous. How many lives have been lost, not just due to heart attacks, but due to errors or machinery or being the machinery being at fault. Working at the port people will tell you, particularly longshoremen, is an extremely dangerous job for males, females, all of them. And so port workers can be impacted in a positive way if they're engaged and they're at the table, if they're having these kind of conversations, even in their respective unions, and not making it simply about a dollar, because you deserve the money, you deserve more money. But that is a separate conversation from your health, not a trade-off. And so I should say that too, the port, but also is unique about the Port Advisory Council in New Jersey, and we want to continue in Newark. We want to continue that model. Is that particular Port Advisory Council, Regina Towns, I mentioned her earlier. Well, it's led by a retired longshoreman who was a woman, so she leads it and then chairs it. And then there's 3 active longshoremen who are also on that Port Advisory Council. And I can tell you this: there is no longshoremen or staff members or workers who are part of any Port Advisory Council anywhere in this country. We are truly doing the business of helping to bridge the gap between the labor advocates and the environmental justice advocates, who sometimes and often have come together, like we did when we defeated Amazon in Newark, New Jersey a couple of years ago. But they have a problem staying together because for environmentalists, it's more relentless about the principles of environmental justice, right? And for the union, sometimes it's about that dollar. And so we want to strike a balance, and we want to say, again, you deserve the money, but it's not a trade-off for your health.
So the question is, how does Friends of the Earth currently define its stance on port expansion when tied to zero emissions infrastructure?
Yeah, we don't necessarily support port expansion, especially if it's not if the community was not engaged in the process. If this is one of those situations where you are expanding the port and you are holding press conference to tell the community that that's what's happening because that's required for you to receive funding or be in compliance, that's unacceptable. And so, when we look at port expansion projects like the LIT terminal in Louisiana, again, it's going to end up replacing or washing out 3 different parishes. And it's also caused the relocation of a school. And while they may be putting the school closer into the community and further away from the port, we don't know what the conditions of that building is that school is going in, because the community wasn't allowed. We don't know if they're getting an older building, worse building, or better building, and whether the air quality is maybe just insignificantly slightly better versus or worse. And so those things are important. So I'll say our stance is it must be community centered, and that expansion projects that destroy the community and expansion projects that do not incorporate electric terminals in them. Meaning if you're just taking new funding and doing old business or business as usual, that is not something that we support. So as a specific example, again, when we were asked by our friends at the Port of New Orleans to support or sign off on the letter of the LIT project, we declined to do so. But I didn't just decline to do so. I asked them, well, who are the groups that are supporting it? And I spoke to them. And so they knew nothing about environmental justice. They did not understand the implications, the adverse implications, the impacts of that project. And in terms of the millions and millions of dollars that was there for planning and to engage the community, they did not know about that. And so I also reached out to other groups who were not a part of that to see what they thought. And so it really boiled down to the project really just did not engage the community. And so even those parts that are good are not known or not heard. And those parts that are not so good, you know, there was a lawsuit filed over it, and we're presently working with that. And the same thing happened in Savannah, and we are working with a group on that on the aftermath of that lawsuit, pretty much. And when we look at Savannah, the port doesn't want to be sued again, and they don't want to risk holding up this project. But in order to do that, they were required to work with the community and hold several, not listening sessions, but engagement sessions to ensure that this project is not the worst it can be if it's inevitable that it would be, come to fruition.
Thank you for sharing that. Tell me, what lessons has FO learned from navigating the coalition tensions between the opposing expansion and supporting that greenhouse build out?
Yeah, we just have to be consistent in our messaging and relentless in our effort. And again, it goes back to the education piece. These are issues and topics that typically the big greens really champion and lobby around. I want to say on a daily basis, or just a part of their continued and ongoing work. That's not necessarily the case for the local groups. And so we need that dynamics to change slightly, whereas the local groups are really at the forefront, and they're calling us to say, hey, it's a priority for us, not us saying, hey, this should be a priority to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing like having these big projects and we're the ones that are being affected the most and not being included.
Yes, and with government funding, this is not, they're not using their capital dollars, and even then, as a neighbor, you get to weigh in on that. If your neighbor had abandoned cars in their backyard and wasn't cutting their grass and wasn't cleaning, there's ordinances there. And code enforcement officers that can go around and hold them accountable. Where's the code enforcement for the port being a bad neighbor,
That is for sure. Wow.
And we shouldn't need to be fined in order to be a good neighbor. How about that? That's another point I would say.
So does anybody else have any questions? I think I saw a couple of comments coming through. If there's anybody else, I'm going to bring the crew that are backstage back up front.
I guess I'm not being heard.
Yeah.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I know this is a bit of a stretch, but do you see this partnership that we're building? Will this be lifelong partnerships as the ports are our neighbor? Or is this for a period of time? Let's say this is an initiative for the next 20 years. Like, where do you see this partnership 20 years from now?
I'm 42, and so I hope that I can retire in this work. And so as long as I'm walking and breathing, it's always about purpose, right? And I'm fortunate enough and blessed enough to be able to do this work full time. Many of our local groups are not. Those are folks who have full-time careers, who still have full-time careers. They're educators. They work for school systems. They work for statewide nonprofits. And something compelled them at work, whether it was a Facebook, a social media post, whether it was a news article, whether it was a blog or an actual news story. And it could have been about plastics. It could have been about sound pollution. It could have been about air pollution or water pollution. Could have been about trucking. And they said, wait a minute, this is not right. I need to learn more about this. Then they said, wait a minute, I'm gonna start a nonprofit. I'm gonna call it, I'm gonna make it an environmental justice group. And I'm gonna start going to environmental justice conferences. And I'm gonna start networking with the national movement. And I'm gonna build a local movement here. Those folks still gotta go. And so to know advocacy work, and I know you know this, Arlene, it is a full-time job no matter what. In order to have transformational success, you have to go over and beyond. And so when volunteerism feels like it is a 80-hour work week, that's activism, that's engagement. so that comes along, I think comes along with the territory. So the short end is that we just have to be, I've said, particularly during this Trump era, I think that's important to this response too. Folks are either taking a fold arm, sit back approach to government, or they're in have a sense of anxiety, right, around what's next and what's coming. What I can say is we've survived this before. We've probably survived worse before, I'm sure. What is key that we should do is what we've been doing. Stay active locally.
Right.
Stay active locally. Get attached to a group like Parents Engaging Parents. Join Southward Environmental Alliance. Join an Ironbound Community Corporation. I see Clean Water Action is represented here today. There's so many different options you can join. Get with a local group. Where you go, EJ goes. Okay. And so you don't have to. There's 17 principles of environmental justice. I encourage those who are watching to Google 17 principles of environmental justice. Just read one. Read them all, but just connect to one. I guarantee you'll find one principle of the 17 that you connect to. Carry that with you every day. Take that into your job. Take that into your church. Take it into the supermarket, even behind the line, when it's an opportunity to come up. I mean, obviously, if folks are talking about how good the pork chops was last night, or the steak was last night, you don't need to say, well, listen, let me talk to you about air pollution. But when you hear someone say, my baby and his asthma or her asthma, well, you know what that asthma about. There's poor air quality in all those trucks. You see what I'm saying? It make sense to meet us where we are. We are all on the same way, right? You know what I mean? And so we don't have to be a science and a lawyer to understand this, to master it. We just got to be a victim of it, and we are. And we're saying we won't just be victimized. We're reclaiming our time, we're reclaiming our health, right? And we're reclaiming our community.
Right. I appreciate that. One of the things I'll add on as we talk about Trump reminded me of COVID, right? And what these times are showing us is that leadership is within. And once we do, like what you say, join a group and cultivate and organize locally, there's nothing going on bigger level of politics that's really going to affect us. Now we have the power to affect and get to the president's ear and eyes. Yeah.
Let him tell you that he didn't know, or you didn't say anything. It's one of those things. And, comedian, what is it? Mayor, forget his name, Mayor, something like that.
Bill Maher.
Yes, had a meeting with him. And so what he was describing in his experience is exactly what I think our politics, our governing structure has come to, which is more of a reality show, right? But that's also speaking to what people are fed up and annoyed with the structure and the historic staleness, really, of our government and how it operates. And it's a declaration to strike a balance, not to throw away democracy. And so when we talk about Trump, he talked about this person that was behaving like a normal human being at dinner. And what the conclusion he was drawing is that he's really just being an asshole, really, or entertaining us as the president. Sorry about that. As the president. But I think Jasmine Crockett's spirits, the government jumped into me. But the idea.
Sometimes you just get a little mad.
The idea around that is not far-fetched. You're dealing with somebody that's there to shake it up, to experiment, to roll the dice, and that's what people elected. What are we going to do about it? Right? What are we going to do about it? So he has ears, he can hear. And he also has he also has a base, whether it's the Republicans or some of the Democrats, that will pressure him when they are impacted. How do you know that, Terrence? Because why are 1 minute we're shutting down the country, next minute we ain't, next minute
right?
That's happening because people in Republican red states are being impacted, and when that happens, it stops. When we impacted, it's more harm, more pressure. We gotta, again, when we say something, it has to matter too.
Absolutely.
And when our politicians say something, it has to matter too. So again, it goes back to consistency, and just again education and making the messaging. It says here how is FO publicly framing port decarbonization to maintain support from grassroots groups in EJ while also pushing for clean infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
It's working with them federally, right? And we've done that on policy aspects, but it's also saying what type of local campaigns make sense for you and your community, and how can I work with the private foundations that we have to get you some seed money so you can at least afford to be able to spend the time to invest in building capacity to do the work, right? But if we won't even take the chance to do that, right? We won't give you $20,000, $30,000 in seed money for 2 or 3 years, and
Mm.
also open up our network to you. And so that's how we're framing it. We are not pivoting local, but Big Greens are pivoting more to local campaigns. Terrence Bankston started out with a local campaign and said that we were going to bridge the gap between what's happening locally in EJ communities and what needs to happen federally. And we're going to position those locally to be at the forefront, not at the back of the line when it comes to federal policy. We don't want that to be out of our wheelhouse. We don't want to feel disconnected from federal policy, but we also know all politics are local. What's politics? That's not just who you're elected. It's anything that's relevant to government. Anything relevant to government is being political, is politics. Get political about environmental justice. It is quality of life. It's public safety. When you're talking about public safety, your cops are out there, what? Running down streets, running through communities, breathing bad air. Okay? And having heart attacks too, right? Their wives are home. Those folks that are having their children. So no matter what connection, which way you want to make it, it connects back to quality of life. You connected it to education earlier. It's there. Those the school system, the adults in the building who would know better once PEP going in and teach them about it, and the teachers and the custodian gonna say, "Well, I didn't know." But once they know, then you can hold them accountable for taking some action. You are feeding the polluter, and we all do. My job, when we fly on planes, we are promoting the polluter, right? So what do they encourage? Well, don't do first class, don't do business class, buy the cheapest ticket. And so it's some of it is feel good work, right? Because we're still in the plane in the air, but we got to get around to do the work, right?
Right.
But when we land, what do we do? So every little bit counts. That's what that really means. Do the best that you can with what you can, but keep walking forward, not backwards, right?
Right.
Mm.
Okay, so and also about the framing of the work. So I talked a little bit about just the approach, but we're also providing resources. So this is a 2-part trilogy, and I have a 3rd part. So I first started out with, well, I know my job is to talk about ports. I can't do it. It's no way. It's the entire maritime shipping supply chain. I want to tell them about that. And I got with my graphic people, and we were able to tell them about that. Then I said, well, wait a minute, there's more. We tell them that emission reports are important, but why? And I'm not talking to just the community. I want to empower them the most, but I'm talking about resources that go from the block to the boardroom. And so this is good for the brother I can say the older guy who's retired and likes to sit outside at the gas station. It's good enough for him, but it's also good enough for the mayor of a city who does not know this. It's also good enough for the superintendent of public schools, board members. They don't know this. And if they do know it and they're not doing anything about it, PEP got to force them to do something about it. And then I got a 3rd piece that's not printed yet, but it's on its way. But the link is in the chat.
I'll send a copy of that over to Roger Leone.
Thank you. Send all 3. We have a trucking piece. Right? The trucking piece is my favorite piece because trucking and workforce development are no matter where I go in this country, every black city is the same issue. They flood our community with diesel trucks because they want to shorten our lifespan on purpose. They flood our streets with diesel trucks because they don't care about our parks being safe. They flood our community with diesel trucks because they don't value Black lives. And yet the same people will get pissed when we say Black lives matter. We have to remind you that we're here because you continue to create policies and we're not the majority in those decision-making rooms, right?
Mhm.
So we are not the ones making these decisions. That's bad for us. And so again, we got to be real intentional and about providing information. And so those free resources, and we shared the links. Please, email those, text them, share them.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And because we all know, and we are all very aware of how intentional um, they were with where we live and what's affordable
Yes.
for us. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Terrence, for all the wealth of information that you have shared tonight. We are going to definitely have you back. This is going to be a series, and so we can't wait to see what else it is that you have up your sleeve. And I'm not even going to say up your sleeve because it's like out in the forefront. What you doing?
No sleeves today.
No sleeves today. But thank you again, Terrence, for joining us and for your energy today.
Appreciate you.
We
Love the
appreciate
PEP
you.
family, and thank you to everybody that joined in. I see we have our Dean here from Rutgers in support. I see we have D. Walker, who's down in Virginia, but originally from New Jersey. So again, big shout out to the Parents Engaging Parents Network and for all the other leaders that I see who were able to engage. Hey, Vanessa.
Hey, Vanessa. All right. Thank y'all. And then I did have one more announcement to make, and that is about our summer camp. And so we are PEP in partnership with Inspire Sports Camp is having our second annual 5-night 6-day camp. It is from the ages from 10 to 16, so 5th to 11th graders. If you scan the code and definitely register, it's sure to be a good time for your kiddos. They're going to have the opportunity to be exposed to some nice, clean, and fresh air. We're talking about right now environmental justice and getting to that clean air, but we want to take our kids to the clean air as well so they could get to experience that and have an enriching week as well. So definitely, if you can, just screenshot this that you see on your screen and get a friend to scan it. Okay. All right. Arlene.
Yes. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you next week.